Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Terry Talk. This week, proximity bias. The world keeps getting more and more complicated. Proximity bias. That's when supervisors, leaders, managers have a bias or a tendency to be more in tune with folks they're working with closely in the office and less so with folks that are working from home or remotely. Kind of makes sense. Those that are nearer to you, you're going to know them better. Those that are remote, maybe not so much. But obviously, this has a pretty big impact on organizations. Just last year, the Society for Human Resources Management, or SHRM, they did a survey about 800 to 1,000 different supervisors. About two-thirds of those, about 67% of them, said that overseeing those supervisors surveyed said that overseeing remote workers, they said didn't think that the workers were working as hard and were probably more easily replaced than on-site workers. And then 42% of them freely admitted, give them a little truth serum there, that sometimes they actually forgot about remote workers when assigning tasks. Again, not surprising. We're human, right? So, and then of course, this becomes even more difficult when you combine proximity bias with unconscious bias, and this is can become very messy for DEI efforts because a lot of groups that traditionally fall into that bracket are a little bit more timid, maybe a little bit more reluctant to come back to work on site on a regular full-time basis. So kind of toxic brew messing there is kind of interesting. What I wanted to focus on today is the mantra of get them back to the office. We need people back to the office. We need to build our cultures. This is really important. And I know I've been an advocate of that up until fairly recently when read a very interesting article in the January-February 2023 Harvard Business Review, where they talk about Mortensen and Edmondson talk about rethinking your employee value proposition. Now, I'm not laying claim to this. I'm just sharing the article. Absolutely fantastic. Pick up a copy if you can. But allow me to summarize a few of the key points, if you will. What they talk about is offering more than just flexibility, which seems to be the panacea for work from home, work remotely, work in office. We'll just make it more flexible. They actually talked about 4 different components to the employee value proposition and how they're intertwined. And if we don't stop and take hold of that, take account of that, we could mess things up. What are the 4 pieces? Well, purpose, we've been talking about that for a long period of time. Community, that's just the group that you surround yourself with, which somewhat speaks to culture. Growth and development, which talks about the ability to develop and grow and continue to learn and develop new skills, which is kind of like what we've talked about before, motivation, mastery. And then finally, this one concept they talk about, material, which is the physical locations, pay, those kinds of things. And what they talk about, what Mortensen and Edmondson talk about, is if you focus solely on just one of those elements, guess what? You're probably going to have your efforts not net out very well at all. And they actually go on to talk about a story of WD-40. We all know about WD-40. Most of us have a can of it somewhere in our homes. And the CEO there, Gary Ridge, talking about thinking systemically about the organization. How do those various factors of the value proposition, the employee value proposition, interact and relate to one another? So they talked about their employees there and how they wanted to continue to work remotely. And what he said was that they came up with this notion of something called work from where. And they said they really matter to them where people work from, as long as you made your decision about where you work from in concert with the corporate values. Brilliant, right? So what did they do? Well, one of their values at WD-40 was creating lasting memories for all relationships, which then kind of forced people to take a step back and determine whether or not their decision to work from home or work in office, how that contributed to the broader WD-40 community, which was another one of their values. So figuring out which is better. And what they found out was most chose to work in office. Didn't tell them they had to. They asked them to consider it in relationship to the values of the organization. And not surprising, most of the employees felt that the culture there had been improving over the last several years and relatively more quickly over the last few when they implemented this new change. So the bottom line to all this is, we're not challenging our leaders just, another tool. Well, we have to check in, not check up with employees, but really how to overcome this bias. And there's two things to focus on, we believe, and this is what the article also talks about, and I agree wholeheartedly with the authors, is we need to focus beyond just the immediate and today. We got to think longer term. What are the longer term implications of the decisions we're making inside our organization? And secondly, we have to view our value proposition through a multi-focus lens that includes focus for today versus focus for tomorrow, and one's own needs versus that of the collective. And that's where I think leaders need to start to shift their focus a little bit. And that is, how do we make sure that we're getting people to see both short-term and long-term, but also seeing their own needs versus the needs of the organization? It's going to be an incredibly challenging time as it continues to evolve. Lots going on in this space. As always, drop a comment in the box below, hit that subscription button. We'd love to hear more from you, and we'll see you again soon.